introduce the first speaker. If I could invite the ministers and ambassadors and CIFOR to the stage so we could hear those additional speakers. Thank you, ministers. So now I'd like to welcome the Honourable Dato' Ali Apong, Minister of Primary Resources and Tourism for the Government of Brunei. Minister.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Distinguished guests, my fellow government leaders, delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and a very good morning to all of you. To start with, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude for the invitation of the host country, Her Excellency Siti Nurbaya Baka, Minister of Environment and Forestry, Republic of Indonesia, and to the Honorable Josh Frydenberg, Australian Minister for the Environment and Energy, to deliver our country statement at the 3rd Asia-Pacific Rainforest Summit here in Yogyakarta, Indonesia. Our theme for this summit, protecting forests and people, supporting economic growth, is very much in time and significant in our recent initiatives in Brunei Darussalam. As we hosted the 2nd Asia-Pacific Rainforest Summit in 2016 in Brunei Darussalam, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Australian government and the Centre for International Forestry Research for all the support in making the summit a very successful event. During the summit, we acknowledged the significant role of the government institutions in promoting effective governance of our rainforests. We also recognize the essential role of the forest industries in bringing back investment into the forestry sector, finance forestry projects and programs, and contribute to sustainable development. We also agreed that rainforest sector restoration and management is not the sole responsibility of the government, but as a whole, we must act and share together the responsibility of conserving our rainforest ecosystem. Ladies and gentlemen, Brunei Darussalam is a relatively small country, yet we have gained recognition for having a well-kept tropical rainforest, of which majority is still in pristine condition. At present, 41% of the country's land area is declared as forest reserves and are protected by legislation. The country's forestry sector was formalized with the passage of the Forest Act in 1934, some 80 years ago. It paved the way for the proclamation of the national forest, and by adopting the principle of renewability, sustainability, multiple use, and ecological equilibrium management strategies and programs, we sustainably manage and administer our forests. At present, I'm proud to announce that our forest reserves are still 100% covered with forests. Ladies and gentlemen, in respect of our intended nationally determined contribution, INDC, our forests play an important role in mitigating our emission, Brunei's tree cover is estimated to be 72.1% of the total land area of 5,765 square kilometers. It comprises of what experts believe to be the oldest tropical rainforest in the world, to include mangroves and the timber utilization quota remains at 100,000 cubic meters per year and is strictly implemented. Our timber production statistics in the past years has always been below the required logging quota. Instead, we have been promoting the effective and efficient utilization and processing of timber through the use of high technologies and modern woodworking machineries. Ladies and gentlemen, peat swarm forests are the second most dominant forest type in Brunei Darussalam, covering 16% of the country's land area. They are very much intact and believed to be the highest proportion of intact peat swarm ecosystem in Southeast Asia. Our peat swarm forests played a significant role during our early economic development, as it supports the raw material needs of the early structural development of our oil and gas sector and its related infrastructure. However, the realization of the true protective and biological value of the peat swarm ecosystems has prompted the government to preserve the forest and finally end the exploitation of this forest ecosystem. Peat swarm forests have more benefits in terms of its rich biological diversity. As such, the sequestration of the massive carbon deposits of our peat swarm ecosystem, as well as in our natural forests, will be our great contribution to the global climate change initiatives. At present, we are opening our windows for more research collaborations in further understanding the ecosystem and to develop effective management strategies for the benefits of the global communities. Ladies and gentlemen, the Brunei government has steadily opened up its economy and called for partnership with stakeholders in the private sector to take advantage of the opportunities offered by the diversification as outlined in the Brunei Vision 2035. At present, the development of sustainable ecotourism and the conservation of biodiversity become part of our environment strategy as continuing efforts of the government to conserve our remarkable biodiversity, rainforests, and natural habitats. It stresses the development of our rainforest resources, conservation and protection, and sustainable ecotourism as the main focus of the forestry sector. The increasing national appreciation on forest conservation and the value of its biodiversity have led to another approach in forest management and administration. This increasing value has led us to the development of the non-extractive economic activities, such as sustainable ecotourism that would benefit the country, especially the local communities adjacent to our forest ecosystem. Sustainable ecotourism would promote responsible and committed tourism through their participation in forest conservation initiatives. Also in tree planting, culture and heritage protection, and the provision of alternative livelihood to local communities. However, to realize sustainable ecotourism, our conservative society needs more entrepreneurial and creative minds from the private sector to develop our ecotourism industry. At present, we are reassessing our ecotourism potential and identifying potential partners that will strengthen local community management skills in providing the necessary ecotourism and cultural services. Ladies and gentlemen, going back to our theme, protecting forests and people, supporting economic growth is not only a national concern, but of a global issue. Brunei is relatively a small country that makes it looks manageable, but of course, we cannot do it alone. The issues at hand require a regional or global approach and come up with better ideas, policies, action plans, and implementation strategies. Warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. So now I would warmly welcome the Honourable Hosea Nagamu, Minister of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forests for Fiji, to provide a statement from Fiji.
Your Excellencies, respected dignitaries, ministers, distinguished guests, officials from member countries, organizers, and coordinating partners, ladies and gentlemen. Bolobinaka, and a very good morning to you all. It is indeed an honor and privilege to be invited here today at the 3rd Asia-Pacific Rainforest Summit. I'm proud to be here on behalf of the Fiji government to deliver my address at this session. I thank the government of Indonesia and the Ministry of Environment and Forestry for hosting this 3rd summit, and the coordinating partner country, Australia, and the Department of Environment and Energy for their combined efforts in making this all happen. As you know, through its presidency of COP23, Fiji has been building a grand coalition committed to taking action and communicating the sense of agency widely to all levels of government, to investors and financing institutions, to the private sector, to civil society, organizations, and to local communities. As our Prime Minister, the Honorable Josiah Warenge Bainimarama, stated at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting this past week, and I quote, "We must accelerate climate action and drive decarbonization and press for the most ambitious target of the Paris Agreement, that is limiting the increase in global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, above that of the pre-industrial age," unquote. In March this year, Fiji hosted the 3rd Regional Pacific NDC Dialogue on nationally determined contributions and consultations on the Regional Pacific NDC Hub to support countries in the process of implementation and enhancement of their NDCs. This regional platform was called for during the Climate Action Pacific Partnership in July 2017. Built on past dialogues in support of NDC implementation, this provided a Pacific platform for discussions on NDC implementation planning, linkages to SDG processes, opportunities to advance gender, translating NDCs into investable and actionable projects, and long-term development strategies under the Paris Agreement, such as the 2050 platform. As a nation, we have mainstreamed and integrated climate change into national planning and development processes, economic policy, and decision-making. This has led to the development of the Green Growth Framework for Fiji, the 5-year and 20-year National Development Plans, and NDC Implementation Roadmap and Framework for the National Adaptation Plan. As part of this increasingly comprehensive approach to climate change, Fiji acknowledges the importance of forests, both in terms of achieving its Paris Agreement goals and those of the United Nations Sustainable Development Agenda. In particular, the critical role of forest is acknowledged in Article 5 of the Paris Agreement, which urges countries to take action to conserve and enhance forests, including through reducing deforestation and forest degradation. Furthermore, Fiji understands that forests are a critical part of the answer to our climate change because we know that a 1.5 degree world is simply not possible without tackling deforestation and forest degradation and the associated emissions. Forests are a large part of our current problem in terms of continuing emission from deforestation, but an even larger part of the solution in terms of ending those emissions and enhancing the safe and natural carbon capture storage function of standing and regrowing forests. And without promoting healthy forests, we also know that our nations won't be resilient to the impacts of the extreme weather events without these natural buffers and barriers that protect us and that contribute to healthy, sustainable livelihoods. In our Green Growth Framework for Fiji, we have specifically recognized the role of forests in climate change mitigation and adaptation efforts. Reducing emission from deforestation and forest degradation and forestry protected areas are mentioned as activities which focus on sustaining the natural forest resources. Renewed efforts are identified for implementation, afforestation, and reforestation, and conservation of natural forest. In Fiji, 54.7%, or about 1 million hectares of Fiji is forested. Of this, 89.4%, or roughly 894,000 hectares, is classified as primary forest, the most biodiverse form of forest. Forest, in this context, include not only land-based forest systems, but also the wider mangroves and seagrasses and reef systems that are critical to island nations. However, we also have large areas of degraded and unutilized land with potential for broad reforestation and afforestation activities. As a country, we are committed to ensuring we place the protection of our remaining forests and the pursuit of restoring degraded areas at the heart of our national response to climate change. To achieve, we embarked on the following: One, Fiji has embarked on a comprehensive REDD+ strategy, which continues to assess issues such as drivers of deforestation and forest degradation, strategic environmental social assessment, feedback grievances redress mechanism, carbon rights, and benefit sharing mechanism. We have a REDD+ demonstration site and MRV systems being finalized. Fiji has been working with the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility of the World Bank and the SPC GIZ Regional Program, coping with climate change in the Pacific Island region as part of its REDD+ readiness work. This includes the intent to develop an emission reduction program to cover 90% of the land area of Fiji and 94% of forested areas in Viti Levu, Vanuatu, and in Taveuni, and the sale of 3.6 million REDD+ emission reduction between 2019 to 2024 to the FCPF. This readiness work also includes Fiji working closely with the University of Hamburg to establish its forest reference level, work that is almost complete. Fiji has legally declared and protected forest and nature reserves, as well as a government-managed national park. This national park is a model for other parks and has been replicated around the nation as community-based ecotourism projects to improve livelihood and alleviate poverty, economic development, and biodiversity conservation. The communities living around this national park benefit from employment in managing the park and economic benefits from tourism activities. This National Forest Park was also awarded the certification of excellence winner in 2015 by TripAdvisor as a Global Tourism Survey recognition, and the Queen's Commonwealth Canopy Award for forest conservation. Fiji acknowledges the role of carbon-rich mangroves in climate adaptation, preventing coastal erosion, addressing risks from coastal flooding and sea level rise. Currently, Fiji is undertaking a community-based mangrove restoration and sustainable management project with support from ITTO. The project includes policy development, capacity building, establishing alternative species for mangrove-dependent communities, and educating them towards conservation of mangroves. The same project site is being used to conduct preliminary work on blue carbon with Conservation International and is a first for Fiji in terms of blue carbon work. Finally, going towards Fiji has noted in its NDC that further accounting will need to take place to incorporate. We look as to how REDD+ will be incorporated into each NDC. At this point, I wish to acknowledge the financial, technical, scientific capacity building and advisory support rendered towards the implementation of its global and national forest goals by various organizations, including World Bank, FCPF, JEF, FAO, GIZ, Asia, UNFF, SPC, Conservation International, UNDP, WWF, ITTO, EU, to name a few. These organizations have been instrumental in supporting Fiji drive national actions towards sustainable management, development, restoration, and protection of forests in Fiji. As Minister for Forest, I also believe that there is an important link between the objectives of the Paris Agreement and the Global Sustainable Development Goals and protecting our rainforest as all inseparable. In Fiji, at a sub-national level, the ministry plan aligned to Fiji's 20-year National Development Plan, the SDG goals, and the UNFF strategic goals. The forest sector strategic development plan prioritizes a sustainable forest management framework, encompassing outputs addressing SDGs 1, 2, 5, 7, 13, 14, and 15. One of the goals of the ministry's strategic development plan is to contribute positively to the global environment. This will address environmental-related SDGs, along with commitments embedded in the Convention on Biodiversity, the United Nations Forum on Forest, and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, all of which Fiji is party to. The activities implemented to deliver SDP outputs and outcomes, including afforestation and reforestation, to enhance carbon stocks, protect and restore catchments, conserve biodiversity, establish wood and non-wood plantations, including biofuel and food security species, coastal and mangrove restoration. Most of this reforestation includes community participation on community-owned land, with the government empowering communities, women and youth, and providing financial and development incentives for their efforts. We recognize that mangroves can play a significant role in conserving and enhancing carbon sinks, enabling adaptation to climate change, and achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals 5, 13, 14, and 15. This integration of the Paris Agreement goals and the SDG is seen by Fiji as a critical to protecting forests and people, supporting economic growth. It will require the ongoing development of policies, plans, and frameworks to achieve this. As Fiji reaffirms its commitments towards the global agenda under the SDGs and Paris Agreement, it will continue to protect forests and people, supporting economic growth and addressing rainforest conservation. Finally, I now wish to turn to the issues of finance. Critical to our efforts to protect forests is the need for innovative finance mechanisms to protect all kinds of forest, again, including land-based forests, mangroves, and seagrasses. While negotiations on forests have been among the most constructive strands of negotiation over the last 10 years, producing detailed rule book on REDD+, the fact remains that the rule provides no actual formal mechanism within REDD+ for financing forests. REDD+ has struggled because the lack of a carbon market has left it dependent on voluntary action and without the certainty needed to attract private funding. Additionally, the mechanism being pursued by Norway and the World Bank's Forest Carbon Partnership Facility are excellent measures to develop REDD+. But we now need long-term public and private sector finance flows to ensure that finance will flow into actual forest. In this regard, I note that while many governments have implemented measures to protect forests through establishing protected areas, this is not sufficient to avoid their destruction. Furthermore, despite the natural value of forest, they do not offer a financial return on investing in their conservation, protection, and management that can compete with the more destructive uses. There are no well-established markets for forest carbon or the broader benefits they provide, despite being critical to our very survival. Forests have therefore been unable to attract private sector finance at any scale. The hard cold reality is that protecting forests at any scale requires capital, significant expenditure, like any green infrastructure project. Between 2006 and 2014, a total of US $9.8 billion was invested into forest, almost 90% of which came from the public sector. However, it is estimated that somewhere between US 17 to 33 billion is required per year to halve deforestation by 2030. Given the limits on public climate finance, substantial financial support must come from vastly larger pools of capital available only from the private sector. Fiji has taken leadership in this regard by launching our own sovereign green bond, which will raise 100 million Fijian dollars, which was listed on the London Stock Exchange last week. The proceeds of which will go towards climate mitigation and adaptation projects, including possibly in the REDD+ and reforestation area. Going forward, we are hopeful that the rules being negotiated for the implementation of the Paris Agreement smooth the way for further international cooperation on REDD+, and in particular, innovative financing approaches under Article 6. All countries, but especially forest countries, enhance the profile of forest in the NDCs, commensurate with the mitigation potential and potential to contribute to other SDGs. Mechanisms such as the GCF result-based payment for REDD+ are implemented. Developed countries and the private sector increase financing flows for forest, especially the promise of result-based REDD+ payments, commensurate with their mitigation potential. This includes working together to develop mechanisms that drive and attract investments, both public and private, into REDD+, in a way that values this forest for their nature-based solutions to climate change and assisting to adapt to climate change. And other countries work with Fiji to follow the lead we have taken with our green bond to develop bonds tailored specifically towards protecting forests and landscape. We look forward to a successful third Asia-Pacific Rainforest Summit and wish you all a constructive and enjoyable 3 days in your participation and contributions towards the success of this summit. Vinaka, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. I can now warmly welcome Her Excellency Dr. Amy Khor, Senior Minister of State and Minister of the Environment and Water Resources for Singapore, to provide a statement from Singapore. Thank you.
Your Excellency Siti Nurbaya Bakar, Minister of Environment and Forestry, Indonesia, Your Excellency Josh Frydenberg, Minister for the Environment and Energy, Australia, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Selamat pagi. Good morning to one and all. I'm indeed honored to speak at the third Asia-Pacific Rainforest Summit. The theme, Protecting Forests and People Supporting Economic Growth, is a pertinent challenge that the region has to address, particularly in the face of climate change. The forests of Asia and the Pacific make up about 18% of global forest cover. Primarily regarded as carbon sinks, forests also host a rich biodiversity and sustain the livelihoods of millions. Curbing deforestation and protecting existing forests are instrumental in the fight against climate change, and the achievement of Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. Singapore would like to join the region in solidarity to reaffirm our support for sustainable forest management. There is vast carbon mitigation potential that the forests in the Asia-Pacific region can contribute if the forests are managed sustainably. I'm encouraged that some advances have been made on the Reducing Emissions from Deforestation and Forest Degradation Program, or REDD+. The adoption of the Warsaw Framework for REDD+ is a step in the right direction in making REDD+ an actuality. Countries must now focus on implementing the program to preserve forests and the carbon stored in these sinks. Since independence, the development of Singapore have been based on the principle of sustainability. We moved heavy industries away from the populace, cleaned up our rivers, and ramped up our public sanitation efforts. We also balanced our urban landscape with parks and gardens to provide shade, cool and fresher air, and nurtured healthy ecosystems for our native biodiversity. Indeed, as I was speaking to His Excellency, the Minister from Brunei, he made the remark that Singapore doesn't have rainforests, but we create forests. Despite being a highly urbanized city-state, more than 40% of Singapore is covered with greenery. Our forests in our 4 nature reserves are managed for conservation, research, recreation, and education. To make Singapore a livable and environmentally sustainable city, we have implemented several initiatives to evolve Singapore from a garden city to a city in a garden. But these efforts alone are not enough for us to keep ahead of the challenges of climate change. We have to step up efforts in climate action. This means keeping track of our emissions for accounting obligations and supporting credible certification schemes. Tracking emissions as land uses change over time ensures that our nature reserves and other nature areas continue to be a valuable carbon sink. We have been monitoring and reporting on greenhouse gas emissions and removals from the land use change and forestry sectors, or LULUCF for short, since 2013. Initial results have shown that LULUCF contributed to a reduction of 0.5% of Singapore's total greenhouse gas emissions. The certification of forest products is also a critical step towards sustainable forest management. As consumers for wood products, especially processed products such as paper and pulp, we want Singaporeans to be environmentally conscious green buyers. Such a behavioral movement requires the support of certifying bodies. The Singapore Green Label Scheme has helped to guide Singapore's consumers when they purchase a product. This in turn encourages producers to adopt sustainable practices during production. In January last year, the Singapore Environment Council, or SEC, launched a holistic green labeling category for paper and pulp products, which encompasses peatland management and fire prevention standards as part of its criteria. Companies with such certified products are required to have their entire supply chain audited against these criteria. To walk the talk, the Singapore government fronts, and this goes beyond forest conservation. Given Singapore's vulnerability to the effects of climate change, we have committed under the Paris Agreement to reduce our emissions intensity by 36% from 2005 levels by 2030, and to stabilize our emissions with the aim of peaking around then. We are committed to meeting our pledge, and we are on track to meet our 2020 commitments. Singapore is also strengthening our resilience and adaptive capacity and integrating climate change measures into our long-term policies, strategies, as well as planning. This would involve significant investments in infrastructure. We also leverage biodiversity to increase our resilience against climate change effects, like conserving our mangroves and coral reefs that help in carbon sequestration and protect our coastline. Singapore will also implement a carbon tax in 2019 that will provide the price signal to catalyze economy-wide behavioral changes to prepare our businesses to be more energy and carbon efficient and transition our economy to a low-carbon future. Singapore also designated 2018 as our year of climate action to rally our citizens, businesses, and communities to take action to reduce our carbon footprint and fight climate change. As the ASEAN chair this year, we will work with ASEAN countries to take climate action. Singapore will convene a special ASEAN ministerial meeting on climate action, or SAMCA, in July this year, the 10th of July to be exact. So you could put that down in your diary. We will also hold a back-to-back expanded SAMCA with ministers from China, Japan, the Republic of Korea, and the UNFCCC COP current and future presidents from Fiji and Poland respectively. These meetings will serve as a platform for constructive dialogue and send a strong signal on the region's commitment to the Paris Agreement. As the chair of the ASEAN Working Group on Climate Change, Singapore has been working on the implementation of capacity building programs and technical exchanges in the region in areas such as adaptation and mitigation. Last October, Singapore and the UNFCCC organized a workshop on carbon pricing as part of the collaboration between ASEAN and UNFCCC's Collaborative Instruments for Ambitious Climate Action Initiative. Let me conclude. Climate change is a global problem. It can only be tackled effectively if all countries take climate action across all sectors. Current NDCs do not bring us to a future that is consistent with the goals of the Paris Agreement. It is estimated that the world's forests absorb about a third of anthropogenic CO2 emissions. Forests play a critical role in global efforts to address climate change. I'm indeed heartened to see representation from government, research, civil society, and private sectors from across Asia-Pacific gathering at this summit to discuss this critical issue today. We all need to work together to preserve our environment for our future generations. I would like to thank the Indonesian government for hosting us here in Jakarta and the Australian government for supporting this event. I wish all of you a most lively and constructive discussion ahead. Terima kasih. Thank you.
Mr. Ricardo Calderon, Assistant Secretary at the Philippine Department of Environment and Natural Resources. Thank you.
Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, development partners, distinguished guests, participants, good day, and mabuhay. The Department of Environment and Natural Resources of the Republic of the Philippines, Secretary Roy A. Simatu, wish to extend his congratulations to Her Excellency Minister Dr. Siti Nurbaya of the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources of Indonesia, and His Excellency Minister Jos Frydenberg of the Department of Environment and Energy, Government of Australia, for co-hosting the 3rd Asia-Pacific Rainforest Summit here in majestic Yogyakarta, protecting forests and people, supporting economic growth. In the 1950s, the Philippines started the cutting and harvesting of our natural dipterocarp forests and exported this premium hardwood species all over the world. The forestry sector alone contributed 10% of the gross domestic product during those years. We started our rehabilitation efforts in the 1960s, but failed to provide solutions to major drivers of deforestation and degradation, like illegal logging, slash and burn agriculture, illegal cutting, upland poverty, good governance, institutional problems, including lack of government funding. Our 1990 Forestry Master Plan for Forest Development indicated that we have more than 20 million Filipinos living in the upland areas with a population growth and poverty incidence higher than the national average. Our forest cover is down from 16.8 million hectares in 1934 to only 6.84 million hectares in 2010, roughly 19% of our total land area. From 2003 to 2010, we are losing our forests at a rate of 46,954 hectares annually, and the rate of degradation is at 142,347 hectares annually. Our forests and forest land is nearing the tipping point of irreversible loss. We need to recover the forests that we lost and rehabilitate the remaining degraded areas. In 2011, we started the implementation of the National Greening Program, the biggest reforestation program of the Republic of the Philippines, funded by taxpayers' money high-value crops such as coffee, cacao, and rubber. It was the first time that we used high-value crops in our reforestation activities in partnership with upland communities. Our thinking is that these upland communities will protect these trees, as this will also provide them livelihood in the next 3 years. On the other hand, in the protection forests and protected areas, we planted endemic and indigenous tree species, including bamboo and rattan. Mangrove and beech forest species were planted in the coastal areas in partnership with coastal communities and local government units. The National Greening Program has established partnership with private companies, corporations, people's organizations, civil society organizations, local government units, and state universities and colleges, including government offices and institutions. We have attracted almost 10,000 partners nationwide. The program has also generated 4.2 million jobs and employed 550,000 persons, all coming from upland communities and rural areas. As I speak in front of you today, a total of $944 million had been invested from 2011 until 2018, and $100 million more was proposed for 2019. From 2011 until 2018, a total of 1.9 million hectares of degraded and denuded forest land were planted and rehabilitated. Forest rehabilitation and forest protection are the key elements in the 70% commitment of the Philippines in the Paris Agreement, ratified by the Philippine government on March 23, 2017. Forest accounts to 40% of the national determined contribution. We have refocused and intensified our efforts to protect our remaining natural forests. The marching order of our Secretary is that we will further intensify our efforts to protect our natural forests. Our forests and natural growing trees are better off standing in the forest than apprehended but already cut by illegal loggers and timber poachers. In order to expand our forest cover and enhance our carbon stock, we will be needing $900 million more in the next 5 years until 2022, and the same amount from 2022 till 2028. As per our projections, we'll be able to increase our forest cover from 32% to 36%. We will be able to further increase the resilience of our upland communities, improve their means of livelihood. This will also lessen the threat of flooding and landslide in our lowland communities, thus enhancing agricultural productivity. But we also have to invest more on advanced technology, not just on the planting and growing of trees, but also on satellite technology, so that we will be able to account for every hectare planted and rehabilitated. In this way, we could account for every dollar spent coming from our taxpayers' money. On the long term, in order to ensure sustainability and gradually reduce the dependence of our communities from government, we have to invest in the development of social enterprise in the upland, so that our upland farmers can become businessmen as well. We should be creating independent communities able to sustain themselves and become part of the value chain. Along this line, we need the private sector as partners, and civil society organizations and non-governmental organizations to assist our upland farmers. In order to sustain the gain, the National Greening Program was expanded until 2028, aligned with the Philippine Development Plan and the Philippine Forestry Master Plan. The program is our major intervention in order to achieve sustainable development goals, specifically Goal 1, no poverty; Goal 2, zero hunger; Goal 13, climate action; Goal 15, life on land; and Goal 17, partnership to achieve the goal. While the implementation of the program are not without problems and difficulties, we are now documenting the testimonials of beneficiaries of upland communities, indigenous peoples, women's group, and upland households whose lives were improved as a result of the program. Communities are now empowered and transformed from being mere spectators to actual partners of government and implementers of the program. We in government are pleased by the economic gains of the people, in these upland communities. Farmers are able to sustain the schooling of their children, gaining knowledge from training, able to make investments on cooperative stores, community nurseries, and community transport vehicles. But more importantly, with the millions of dollars we have invested so far, we have 1.9 million hectares of new forests rehabilitated, protected, and managed by empowered communities. We have increased our forest cover from 23% to 23%. Our upland communities are now more resilient, empowered, and productive citizens in a more functional forest ecosystem. Thank you, and let us work and participate for a more successful third Asia-Pacific Rainforest Summit. Thank you and good day.
Thank you. So now we can change tact a little bit. So we've been
roadmaps for global sustainable development. They confirm that we are in this together, and we must find solutions together. Obviously, countries will individually implement and report their own domestic measures to fulfill these obligations. In Norway, our government has decided that all ministries shall report on their own contributions and achievements in the annual budget paper presented to our national parliament. We are already experiencing that some targets are harder to reach than others, but we see progress. 1st of January this year, Norway's Climate Act made our national climate goals into law. Based on our Paris contribution, Norway is now legally committed to become a net zero emission economy in 2050. That would require emission reduction of some 80 to 95% from our 1990 levels. The road there goes through a target of an at least 40% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and becoming emissions neutral by the same year. We aim to fulfill this through a collective delivery with the EU and its member states. Minister Siti Nurabaya, Excellencies and colleagues, in Norway's economy we have 4 main emission sources. Around 50% of the emissions are already covered by the emission trading system, the ETS of the EU, originating mainly from industry, aviation and the oil and gas sectors. Remaining emissions mainly comes from transport and agriculture. Our electricity needs are covered almost entirely by our vast renewable hydropower resources. One of the policies that have received international attention is the tax exemptions and other attractive incentives for Norwegians who buy electric cars. This has led to a massive growth in sales of electric cars, and the number of new cars with a traditional fossil combustion engine now is surpassed by emission-free or hybrid cars. Norway has the highest share of electric cars per capita in the world, and this has happened in a few years. We are using this momentum in moving towards electric transport solutions also at sea, with the national ferry system gradually phasing out diesel engines and switching to batteries. As you are all well aware, the biggest challenge yet is our oil and gas sector, where emissions from our production continue to represent a sizable source. Here, the government is investing substantially in research and development on carbon capture storage, a technology also recognized by IPCC as key to realize Paris Agreement. As for our global contribution, I'm happy to confirm that rainforests remain Norway's biggest climate priority. And there, I would like to remind everyone how important the Bali meeting back in 2007 actually was. Ministers, Bali marked the first COP where major decisions on climate and forest were made. A broad coalition of governments, civil society, business and scientists managed to convince the conference. The time had come to formally recognize the role of tropical forest protection in any credible fight against global warming. The message was clear. Without quickly halting and then ending tropical deforestation, it would be possible to reduce emissions at a scale which would prevent the irreversible rise in global temperature. As you know now, and will discuss here in Jakarta, the decision led to the launch of a large number of programs and projects that could deliver emission reductions. We got the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility of the World Bank, the UN RED program, and many smaller projects. Adoption of RED Plus in the Climate Convention mobilized a new and additional funding stream in climate finance, some of these very much being implemented in Indonesia as we speak. Ladies and gentlemen, one of these initiatives born out of Bali is the International Climate and Forest Initiative. Norway pledged up to 3 billion Norwegian kroner a year and promised to work closely with tropical forest countries to end tropical forest loss while improving the livelihoods of those who live off, in and near the forests. An agreement, the letter of intent, was signed with Indonesia in 2010. The government committed Indonesia to large emission reductions. A forest moratorium was issued to stop issuance of new logging concessions and aimed at improving governance of primary natural forest and peatlands. The moratorium covered an area of between 64 and 72 million hectares. It sent a strong political signal of change from both countries. Indonesia would leave the fight to save its rainforest. Norway would provide large-scale financial support to enhance the efforts. Since then, the moratorium has been renewed several times and even been supplemented with special measures to address peatlands. Indonesia's ecosystems are incredibly valuable and sustain the livelihoods of more than 260 million people living on more than 900 islands. Blessed with some of the richest ecosystems in the world, with more plant and animal species than most other nations in the world, this offers many opportunities for discovery, innovation and exploration that will benefit all mankind. Forests play a vital role in any development scenario facing us, but it's also the most important source of emissions. Indonesia plays an important role in reducing its carbon footprint through ending deforestation and draining peatlands, and in restoring degraded forest lands. In succeeding, you will have made a massive global contribution to reach the Paris goal. Your Excellency, Minister Siti Nurabaya, even though it has taken more time than originally anticipated to establish the fundamental components of the partnership, with continued strong leadership from President Jokowi, yourself, and your teams, 2018 might still be the year when Norway can announce the first result-based payments to Indonesia for achievements in reducing domestic forest loss. And when that happens, it will be the crowning example of what two countries, supported by many friends, can accomplish together. It is never easy to change the dynamics of an economy. It requires us to think very differently about what carries value for us in our daily lives, such as clean air and clean water. Reform efforts will always be challenging until you find new economic activity that is less damaging to our environment. Governments must lead this transformation, but do depend on partnerships with industry, local and other communities, civil society organizations, and universities. There will always be a transaction cost because of the risks involved. REDD+ can reduce these costs and help kickstarting the economic transformation across sectors. Through REDD+, forest can actually continue to be a financial source, but now without a single tree being cut and sold for profit, and no peatlands drained. In its most simple form, REDD+ aims to produce independently verified emissions reductions that will automatically and predictably trigger payments from donors and other partners. This, in turn, will provide Indonesia with valuable additional financial resources that can then be used to invest in improved welfare and jobs for the Indonesian people in a new low-carbon climate economy. Friends, we must recognize that Indonesia has a strong agrarian economy, depending on farmers and agro-industry for jobs and growth. In most countries, agriculture is the biggest driver of deforestation. So finding better agricultural practices is important if we are to combine environmental and economic goals. Recognizing the importance of shifting from expansive to intensive production, governments must use a combination of stick and carrot to ensure our food production does not replace our forests and peatlands. And this shift cannot be an interim one. The change must be permanent. Ladies and gentlemen, many of you in this room has worked tirelessly for more than a decade to end the days of deforestation in Indonesia and beyond. And even though important progress has been made, and though our coalition of partnerships are growing, it is important to use events like the Asia-Pacific Rainforest Summit to recognize that the job is not yet finished. I will therefore close by wishing you the best of luck in the discussions during these 3 days, giving us new knowledge and approaches to end deforestation and forest loss. In closing, let me thank our host, the Ministry of Environment and Forest, the Government of Australia, and CIFOR for making this event possible. I wish you all a successful conference. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ambassador. So now I'd call on the delivery partner to the summit, Dr. Robert Nazi, Director General of CIFOR. Robert.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm acutely aware that I'm here standing between you and your lunch, so I will try to keep it reasonably short. But when we talk about the Asia-Pacific region, I'm not going to talk about a country because I'm not going to speak about France here. I'm not going to speak about my wife's country, Indonesia, because many people know better. But if you talk of the Asia-Pacific, of dry forest. All these countries, all these people with all their difference, I think are all going together for one reason, because forests matter. And forests matter for CIFOR also. CIFOR is a Center for International Forestry Research that has been created in 1993. It's headquartered in Indonesia, in Bogor. And our aim, since we have been created in 1993, as really about breaking the old conception about forestry and expanding forestry beyond what is considered as classical in our world. And that's why we have considered elements like what are the underlying causes of deforestation. We are involved in the first system for certification of forestry, developing criterion indicator. In 2016, we developed a new strategy because we thought that following the 2015 Paris Agenda and 2015 Declaration of the Sustainable Development Goal, we had to adapt our strategy and show that forest and forestry would contribute to the 17 SDGs and not simply the SDG 15, life on land. And from that, we have continued working and we developed the largest integrated research program on forestries and agroforestry with partners from ICRAF and other international and national organizations. And our purpose is to make sure and to ensure that forest and forestry contribute to the Sustainable Development Goal as they should, and that they improve the livelihood of local people, they improve the economic returns of forest, but at the same time protect diversity and the environment. I could speak for hours about forest and forestry. I mean, I've been involved with that for more than 37 years now. But in terms of maybe some entry points where people don't look really sort of, forests are very important for food security and nutrition. Our research in Indonesia show that among various land use types, the people that have the most diverse diet are the people that live in where they have the most diverse forest and agroforestries. Forests matter for agriculture. There is a significant effect of having a forest near an oil palm or maize plantation in terms of yield because of the natural pest control exerted by forest. Forests matter also in terms of climate change, not simply because of they are carbon stock. They are carbon stock, but also they have a significant effect in cooling the atmosphere. They have a significant effect in creating rains in places that are far away from where they are, creating rivers in the skies. And what is happening when you deforest in a place like Indonesia has an impact as far as China and Beijing in terms of the amount of deposit of silt that is happening. And there is one ecosystem which has been close to my heart for a long time that encompass all the issues you can think about forest. It's a peatland and mangroves. And peatland and mangroves, although they represent a small percentage of the world forest, are probably the richest and the most carbon-rich ecosystem in the world, and also the most threatened. And I think I can only encourage and commend Indonesia for all the efforts that Indonesia is currently doing in terms of restoring and rehabilitating peatland and working on mangroves. And my last word will be that CIFOR is a research, capacity development, and communication organization. We are not big. We are working with many partners, and we are willing to work with anybody in this room for whom forests matter. Thank you.
So thank you, Ministers. Probably another round of applause for everyone, for all the Ministers. So I think that's, after all those presentations this morning, we've probably got a lot to inform our thinking over the next couple of days and the various sessions. But I think we'll stop for lunch now. We are running a little bit behind schedule. I know everyone's probably getting hungry. So if we stop for lunch, and I think we reconvene at 1:30 in the plenary room again. So thank you again, Ministers.